Hi everyone, in this video we will build a responsive and easily customizable portfolio website using NextJs and Tailwind. We have here multiple sections starting with navigation bar, hero section. We also have animations throughout the page, then a metrics about me section with different tabs you can switch, followed by a showcase of projects that are also clickable each card, and you can navigate to the link of your project or GitHub. We also have tags at the top to filter out the projects and a contact us form that we will connect to the mail server so you can receive the submitted messages in mail. And finally, at the end of the landing page, we have a footer. And let's take a quick peek at the mobile view. We will implement responsive styles. And finally, at the end, we'll also deploy the project using Vercel so you can start sharing the link to your portfolio. And throughout the tutorial, I will also provide some tips for building your portfolio that have been useful throughout my experience. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this portfolio website is easily customizable. And towards the end of the video, I'll also show you how to customize it, and can be done by just changing one line of code. Also, for this memoji, I found some resources so you can browse different memojis and pick one that you like. The tutorial will be divided into chapters, and each chapter will have a corresponding Git branch. So in case you miss something, you can always continue the tutorial with the current progress by checking out the appropriate branch. And if my tutorials are helpful, please like and subscribe. And if you're new here, welcome. Make sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. And without further ado, let's get started. We'll start creating project by running this command npx create next app and latest. If you don't have already installed create next app, it's going to ask you, you just select Y as in yes, then give the project name. After that, it's going to ask several questions about configuration. For TypeScript, we select no, yes, lint, yes, Tailwind as well, yes, and no for source directory. Then for the app router, we select yes, and no for import alias, and press enter. This will download all the required modules. Once it's done downloading, we're going to cd into it, so cd and the project name. And after that, we start our application by running command npm run dev. This will start our application most likely on localhost 3000. It will indicate it, and we can command press, go to the browser, open it up, and that's our application. And before we jump into code, I'll show you guys what we're implementing first, and it's going to be the hero section. As you see here, on the right we have the image, on the left we have the text and the buttons. We're also going to implement this typing animation, and for the text and buttons, first we'll implement it in a simple style and then add gradients on top of it. Now let's quickly go over folder structure. All the configuration related files would be outside of source folder, and then inside source folder is where we have our code. And now if you go to page.js, that is like the main file for NextJs project, and all the page that we saw in the screen, the code is coming from this file. Now I'm going to open it up, our application inside the VS Code. You can have it open in the browser of your choice, but to save space, I'm going to open it up here and Command-Shift-P, or you can open Command Palette from the top menu, and then Simple Browser Show, where we paste the link for localhost. And I'm just gonna move this to the right so I have code on the side and we can see the changes. And I will also delete all this extra code inside the main file. So let's remove that and just add for now a simple header. Once we add that says like portfolio website, we should automatically, when we save the changes, see them. So here it is. Now I'm going to remove this flex classes that is actually centering it, and also the padding. So let's remove it, save. These are the two VS Code extensions that I recommend having to make development faster, also for following this tutorial, but they're totally optional. You can still follow through. And this, our first one is Tailwind, it's from like the creators of Tailwind, and it helps you. First, it gives you suggestions when you start typing for all the Tailwind classes, just in case you don't remember something. And then when you hover over a class, it gives you like a CSS that comes with that class. And the next one is this React snippets. It's like if you create a lot of components, useful because you can select the command and it will create like a simple component for you. Going back to our code on page.js file, we have a flex container as a main container, and let's add the flex direction as column to it. And we can also change the background by BG and then selecting tailwind colors like black, or we can pass a custom color in the brackets and the hash of the color. We're gonna not use directly black, but something a little bit lighter. And once we update that, we don't see the text anymore because it's also of color black. So let's add a class name text white so it shows up. And since we're building out hero section and we'll have other sections on page.js, it is best to create a separate component for it. So I'm going to cut the header from here and add it into our new component. Let's save the changes on page.js for now. And for components, we're gonna create a new folder and let's name it components. And now let's create a new file that says hero section as a name and .jsx as an extension. This is where the extension comes in. I put arrayfc and it creates like a functional component for me. Then I update, instead of div, we're gonna use a section. And I'll also paste the header that we previously copied. And let's update also the text itself. Instead of portfolio website, we can add an introduction here. And it's not showing up yet because we haven't added this on the page. So let's import the component at the top of the page where we have our imports, and then inside main section we can add hero section like this. So now we are able to see it on the screen. We can, after that, add a container. Basically, if we hover over this, we see that what container does is that on larger screens, it expands up to certain width, so it doesn't go full width, and it's a good practice. Usually on the landing pages, you notice they don't go full width. And to center it, because it's not centered by default in Tailwind, we add margins auto, which is MX auto in Tailwind. So this is smaller screen widths, but if we extend it further away, we're going to see white border, which later on we're going to update that so it does not show up. And for inside the content, we can add a padding by P and then the number. We can also give padding a direction. So for horizontal, have a different size padding, and then for PX, that would be on the x-axis a larger one. Let's add a small description inside the paragraph. So I'm going to paste like a dummy text under H1. And for paragraph, it also shows up as a black text color. Update the text color. I'm going to paste in custom color that's a little bit more gray than the white header that we have. And to the header, I'm going to add some margin so we have a space in between header and paragraph. And let's increase the size. So for text, and then there's different sizes. I'm going to set XL, and as for font, that would be extra bold. So if we measure it on the larger screen, it looks okay, but on the smaller one, it's a little too big. So that's where, if you're familiar with media queries, it would be similar to using media queries at different breakpoints that is already provided by Tailwind. So for larger screens, we set LG and text XL. And then by default, we give it what we want on smaller screens, which is text for XL. Okay, and then we can also do this responsive text sizes for paragraph. So for paragraph, I'm going to do text XL by default, and for larger screen sizes, let's do large for default and then XL. So yeah, that looks better. Now let's take this header section and create a grid, like wrap it into a div. that has a class grid. And the reason we do this is we're going to have two columns on the larger screen. So grid calls 12. The reason I put 12 is because of the division. So on the left side, we're going to have text, and that's going to take like a 7 out of the 12 sections that grid I set it for the grid. For the other section on the image, we're going to set the remaining 5. So we wrapped the first section that we want on the left in span, and then we can also center it by place self-center, but on small screens we're going to see only one column. I have added this image inside public images folder. If you want the exact same image, you'd be able to download it from GitHub. Link is in the description of the video. And I generated it using Midjourney. So if you want maybe like what prompts I use, I can make another video about it. Let me know in the comments. And I'm gonna go and add that image inside hero section now for the second column that we have. So to add images in using NextJs, we first have to import image at the top from next image, and then we create it, place it wherever we want. And for the source, I'm gonna change the name because it has spaces and we can't have space in JSX, so I'm gonna name it hero image. So for source, we pass the path of where image is placed. Then we give it an alt text, and width and height is required in next image. So I'll set those values to 300. Now our image shows up. I'm gonna wrap it in another div. Let's add like a circle with the background around it, so it looks cleaner. So I'm gonna take the image, add another div around it, and then for creating circle, it's basically circle is rounded corners, so we set rounded full, like border radius set to really high, and then we set a background color. I'm also going to paste like a past custom color, a little bit more gray than the background, so we can differentiate it, and then we can pass the width and the height to it, 500, 400. Now we want to center the image based on its parent, and that is where transform translate comes in. Transform is like a CSS function that can set your div or image based on what percent of value you pass to translate, which could be either pixels or like a percentage. So I want this image to be centered relative to the parent. So I set parent position as relative, and I set image position as absolute. Then I set it as a transform. That indicates that we want to use transform, and afterwards we set the values for translate. So it could set a position based on x and y axes. So if we set translate x, and negative means it's like -%, 1 from 2 it's like -50% on x-axis, and do the same on y-axis. And we also set from top 50%, from left 50%. That should like perfectly center it. It just switched the position because we don't have the height and width indicated properly to its parent position. But once we update that, let's set 500 pixels, then it is centered relative to the parent. I think it's a little bit a high value, so let's fix that. And also for smaller screens, let's have a smaller value. So I'm gonna do 250 for both values, and then on larger screens, let's have 400. So that looks better. And we do the same for height on the larger screens. Now let's also center our second column by place self-center, and as you can see, it adjusted itself on the x-axis. It got centered. We can next add a margin at the top, so it has some space in between the hero section. And then on larger screens, we can set margin to 0, because on larger screens they're placed right next to each other, so we don't need to push down the image. And I'm gonna also add a margin bottom on the paragraph, because after that we wanna add the buttons. So we would have two buttons in here. Let's create a div, and inside here create both of them. First is going to be hire me, and then the second would be something like, we can say download CV, and we'll pass some shared styling to these buttons. Now the text is black, but I can see it, they show up on the screen. And let's change the styling. So we're gonna add some paddings on the X for 6, and then smaller paddings on Y, that would be 3. Also, let's do rounded full, so it would be more like circular, and margin right, I'm gonna add it only on the first button. Let's paste that stylings on the second button, and now we're gonna have them in like different colors. So for first one, let's set background white, and then on hover, it's usually we set it a little bit darker, so we're gonna do slate 200. As for the text, set it to black so it shows up on contrast. So that's our hire me. And let's continue. For this one, let's do like just a border, white border. So for background, we set it to transparent. And on hover, let's highlight it. So background slate 200, that'll be white. I think text, we can set that to white as well, but let's make darker on the hover, like 800. Text white, then we have a border, we pass border, and then border color, which is white. And let's save this. Great, let's add some margin at the top. And if we expand this, they should be side by side. So I have the app open in the browser, and if we expand it, we can see this like borders. Let's work on removing them, and we're gonna switch to the page JS and update it there. So the main, we can have another div that has a container set on it. So let's create that and wrap a hero section in it. And the main class will have the background that's darker, and we'll apply the rest of the paddings and then the centering of it to the container class. So let's add that on that div. And this is what we get. Now let's clean up our styling on smaller screens and get familiar with other breakpoints. So we're gonna update LG from small, which encounters for styles starting smaller screens. So if we expand that, we'll see that columns 12 applies on larger range of width. And let's also add in between, so we have by default text 4XL, and for a little bit larger screens, we're gonna have text 5XL before it gets to even larger font size. And by default, let's center the text that's on our hero section, and then on larger screens, let's have text aligned to the left so it looks better as centered, but if we expand it, it's gonna stay on the left side. And let's also make the font size of paragraphs too big, so by default make it smaller. We should make buttons full width on mobile, so I'm gonna add w/full, and then on SM width fit, so that way when we extend it, it would be smaller button size. Now we'll make buttons gradient and some of the text, but this is also optional if you want to keep it simple. You don't have to do this part. But for those of you who want to follow, so to make something gradient in Tailwind, we set background gradient and then we pass direction, in this case to B and R. So to the right side, it's going to change color. So starting color, we pass from blue, then we can also pass via. That would add a color stops in between. And at the end, it's going to end with 2 pink 500. So the background of first button got updated. Now let's change text to white so we have enough contrast. Great, and we'll also make part of this, we'll split like the header and some of it would be gradient. So wherever I want to split, I'm gonna press enter. And I will put the first part, wrap it into a span so we can add some styles to it. And we will set For text, it's a little bit trickier because we can just apply color gradient to the text. So what we'll do instead is as a color, we'll apply transparent. Then we'll basically create clip out of it, so it would have a gradient and text would be basically cut out. And we can do the clip by bg clip text, and then we set background once again to gradient the same way we set for buttons. We indicate the starting color, we indicate the color stop, which is optional, and then to what color it transitions to, which is to pink 600. So let's save this, and we got our first line turned into a gradient text. Now let's work on the second button. So in this case, same way, border doesn't have a property for the gradient, but we'll kind of create two elements. One of them would have a gradient background, one of them would be transparent. So we would end up getting the result of border being gradient. So let's set background of the button container, once again gradient, from blue via purple to pink. And it is not changing the color because I have a typo. It should be grid with the I. Okay, save that, and let's add another span around. I'm gonna add that around the text, and we'll be able to add styles to the span. So let's start with giving it a class name and then passing first block position. Then we'll take the background and set it as same as the color of our background, so it has that outline effect. And then on hover, we're gonna make it a little bit lighter. We also need to make sure that we set border radius same, so if we pass also rounded full, it's gonna have the same borders as its like parent, the button. And I'm gonna also add the paddings. And for the border width, since we want it to be 1, the paddings of outside element would be 1, and then minus 6 minus 1, 5, etc. And I'm going to remove this white border. For the typing effect on our hero section, we're going to use this package React Type Animation. And I'm going to copy the install command, npm install React Type Animation. And here they have an example on how we can use it. We can copy this and open VS Code and modify it to our preferences. So I'm going to go back into hero section component, paste it in here. So at the top we need the import command, and I'm gonna leave that, but we don't need an extra component. We can just use this type animation component inside our hero section. So I'm gonna cut that out and paste it. Let's place it where kind of like second line introducing ourselves, so we can include different things like different positions we've held or etc. And the first has to be the word itself, and the second is the number that you see is duration in milliseconds on how long it runs. And then use ref only works on client components, so it might be that type animation uses use ref. So we can turn hero section into client component by adding use client keyword at the top. So now if we save that, the error is gone, and we do see the typing effect. It goes over the array that we pass in the sequence. Now I'm gonna remove the style because the font is too big. Let's save, refresh that, and okay, now it's better. I'm also going to add maybe a little bit of space in between the first span and type animation. We can do that by break tag. In the second part of the tutorial, now we'll implement this navigation bar with links and the menu on the right side or logo on the left side, and we'll also implement mobile menu, which looks like this. So we'll have a hamburger that opens up and displays the same menu we had, and then we can close this out. So once again, in components, I'm gonna create a new file, name it navbar, and let's create a functional component. And I'll update, instead of div, we're going to use nav, which is a tag for navigation. And inside the nav, I'm going to create a div. Let's remove this navbar word and start adding elements into the div. So first we're gonna have on the left side link, and make sure you import link from NextJs link at the top for the logo, and the href, we're just gonna add like a slash that goes to like a home page, and let's also pass words logo into it. As a second div is where we're going to have our menu items. So let's give it a class name menu, and also we're gonna make the parent container for this logo and menu items flags, and we're gonna spread it out, so flags wrap. And items, we can center them. As for the justify, that is going to be between. So first item would be on the left, second all the way on the right. We can also center it and add some padding around so they're not too all the way to the edges. And for the link itself, text would be 5 pixels, so quite like pretty large. Text also color white. Font, we're gonna pick semi-bold. And now to see navbar on the page, I'm gonna go to page.js and add it in there. So we import navbar from components, and then we add before we start the hero section, so all the way at the top. Let's save this and go. Now we are able to see the logo and the navigation bar itself. Now if we inspect it, which we can do by Command Option and we hover over, we see on the green that is a padding, and then menu is all the way on the right. Now let's start filling out the items for the menu. For items, we're going to create an ordered list, and let's add just the first item as an example. So list item li. Then inside we have a link, href. Let's do hashtag about. That's gonna navigate to about section when we build that later on, and give the name title about. I'm gonna save this, and also for the menu items itself, it's gonna be hidden by default because we're gonna create a separate menu for mobile. So for larger screens, medium block with auto, and ID is navbar. And let's add some classes to our link. So first we'll have block, then we'll add some padding on horizontally and also on the left side. The text would be of this like custom hash color, which you can copy from my GitHub or add your own. On small, but let's do text XL, rounded, and then on medium we're gonna have padding 0, and on hover text white so it pops out. And if we go to the application, we can see the about show up where the menu is. And of course we're gonna add more menu items, but since we would have a lot of reusable code for each single item, it is the best to create a separate component for it. And that's what we're gonna do now. So let's go back to our navbar, and we can copy the styling that we did for the link. And I'm going to go to components, create a new file. We're gonna name this navlink.jsx. Enter and create a functional component. And before we add props to it, I'm gonna open our application to the side, and below I'm gonna move navbar where we created like a first link item. So the props that we're gonna need, first we need the link, so we're gonna name it href, and then we need the title, like the label of the menu item. And we were gonna add a return statement. Inside return statement, we can copy this link that we created, but it's more hard-coded. So for the values, we're gonna update as href and title. So it's dynamic, it's getting it from the props. And at the top, we need to import the link, and below we export default nav link. And that's it. It's pretty simple to create components this way and then reuse them. So to use it, I'm gonna remove empty block so that it shows up there because we couldn't see the menu on the small screen. And to use it, import into the component that we want to use it, in this case navbar, and start creating an array of the props that we're gonna pass to this nav link. So first is going to be title, and then we're gonna have href. So these are all the sections that we're going to create. So we're adding them into the menu. Second would be the projects, and lastly we would have contact section. Then we take in this navlinks array, and inside navbar we're gonna map it out, and for each item we're gonna return this navlink. So let's do that. Navlinks.map, and that would be list item. Key has to be unique, so we're gonna pass index to it. And then navlink component, so instead of passing it as a child, we have href that equals to link with that path, and then another props we have title that would equal to link that let's see, title. We have to double check that the value names are correct. And let's close that. We have an error. And oh, I think I'm missing an extra parenthesis here. Another one maybe. Okay, let's save that. And now we have all these list items that are loading as links showing up on our screen. Now let's fix the positioning of the menu items. We want them to show up on a row on certain screen sizes. So on the UL, I'm gonna add a class name flex. I'll also add some padding, which for larger screens it's gonna be 0. And we will also add a flex direction, flex row. Let's do that one as well for small or maybe medium screen sizes. So changing that. And we'll add a spacing. For spacing between flex item, we use space and then the direction and then the number of the space, and margin top 10. That looks better. For the logo, I think the font size is a little bit too big, so let's do text XL for like medium, and by default we can do something like text LG. And I think that one maybe is too small. XL might be better, or 2XL. Let's see. Okay, yep, that looks better. Now let's make sure that when we scroll, the menu and navbar stays at the top, and we can do that by updating styling on the navbar, the nav item itself. So let's add a class name. To make sure the position is fixed, we add fixed, and then we define where is it positioned. So we want from the top to be 0, from left 0, right 0. That way it would expand full width and stay at the top. Okay, so now it's overlapping and it goes behind some of the items, so we want it to always stay visible. So we're gonna update z index, set it to 10. It should be higher than the other items. Let's also set a background color. And for the opacity, so we are still able to a little bit see what items are in the back, we're gonna set to background opacity 90. Okay, so now if we scroll, it remains, and we are able to see it. For initial like page load, we want the hero section and the menu item, of course, not to be overlapping, and we can update that inside the page.js, where we can set margin top of the main container of the page, same as the height of the navbar, so they don't overlap. And let's remove the padding on the navbar is too high, so I'm gonna remove that, save it. So now they're not overlapping anymore, which is great. Let's add the padding X, so on the sides it's not all the way stretched, and I meant X, not Y. And yep, that looks better. For the icons for mobile menu, we're gonna use this package hero icons where we can browse the icons that we want and just copy them. And we do need to install the package. I believe this is also by creators of Tailwind, so that's how I discovered. So if you go to documentation, copy the install command, paste it, install it, and once it is installed, we can go to navbar where we're gonna have the mobile menu logic in the component, and first we have to turn it into a client component because once we add like interactivity like clicking, also use state, we're gonna need to keep track of state if the navbar menu is open or not. Let's add that state. Based on that, we're gonna display different kinds of buttons with different icons. And we can go to where this menu, we want to hide it. So we're gonna add hidden by default, and then on medium to larger screens, it's gonna be block. So now if we minimize the screen, it's gone. And we can add another div that would instead show up. So that would be block by default, and then on medium, it would be hidden. And that would be our kind of like mobile menu. So let's mark the div as that. And inside here, we're gonna have this conditional logic. So if navbar is open, display like the button with open icon, and then if it's not then a different button. So let's just add those in both cases. And here at the top, we still haven't added the icons we want to have, so I'm going to import that. The first one would be bars 3 icon, like hamburger menu, and then second would be the one to close, so X mark icon. And from hero icons, React 24 and solid. All right, and let's put them inside this button here. So first one we're gonna do when it's not open, so bars 3 icon. And then if we don't add the class names, it's not gonna show up. So we have to give height, we have to give width as well. Let's save that and add some styling to the wrapper button itself. We're gonna do text slate 200, give it a color so the icon would take in that color coming from the text class of the button. And we can also make it a flex item center, so our icons are centered. Add some padding on the sides as well as the top and the bottom. But border rounded, the reason we want to have kind of like outlines. Give border the color, which is going to be slate 200 and the same color as the icon. And let's add on hover, make it white, so text white. And doing the same hover effect on the border as well. All right, let's save this and we can copy the same styles, paste it for when the navbar is closed. Just update the icon. It would be like a closing icon. And I think I spelled it wrong. Okay, that looks good. So now we can see the button showing up on our application. But the logic is reversed by default. We don't want X to show up. We want the open icon, but we're gonna update that. Let's also add some padding from the top so it's not all the way to the end of the screen. Okay, and let's also add the interactivity. So when we click, we should like be able to close it out and display the other, but update the state. And for that, we go to button on click. And as like callback, we're gonna pass set bar open hook, and for the value, we're gonna set that to true. And yeah, let's also reverse the logic. So if it's not open, then display the other one. And same thing for the other button, except that the value that it will set would be the opposite, so false. And now if we click here, it's getting, we can see that the button is getting updated. That means the state is also getting updated. Great. And for components, we're going to create a new component menu overlay that's going to be shown up when we switch this menu on like the mobile and press the button. And let's create a component for that menu overlay. It's also a functional component, and we're going to take some of the logic from where we define inside the navbar, and we are also going to use navlink element because we already created a component. We can use it. Only difference would be the way it would show up. So menu overlay container. And as a props, we're gonna take in the links that will later map it out. And let's see how we have inside the navbar. We'll do it in a similar manner. So I'm gonna update this to an unordered list again, and the class name for this one, it would be also flex, but the flex direction is going to be column. Adding some padding, also items would be centered. And let's remove this text and instead create with the curly brackets links, map it out. So you're taking link and the index, and then we need to import navlink at the top so we can use it. And in here, let's return that with the respective props. So href equals to link path, and the title equals to same way we have here, link.title. And once we add the title, let's add just the closing tag for navlink, and also wrap it inside a list item. We pass in the key as an index, and that should be it for menu overlay. We just need to import it into a navbar and then display it when the menu is open. So it doesn't matter where we position it because it should just show up. Actually, it doesn't matter after the logo and the button that we have. So if navbar open, then we're going to display menu overlay, if not null, and we need to pass the links to it so that it knows which links to display, and that would be the nav links that we created here. So let's pass that on, save it, and now if we open the menu, it should show up. Great, I'm just gonna update the opacity so that on we have like full opacity, and that would be inside nav. Yeah, background opacity, let's set it to 100. Save that, and that looks better. Moving on to the next part of the tutorial, we have About Me section that will implement it in the grid. We'll have this image for the section as well as the description, and this will be different tabs that could be switched, and it will display the content for the respective content of that tab. First, we'll create a new component, name it About section. And inside here, once we create functional component, let's import right away on page.js so we don't forget to import after, and it's going to go after hero section. Okay, let's save this, and if we open, it shows up here. The text is black, so that's why we don't see it, but let's start updating and adding things to the component. So going back to about section, I'm going to update the div turn into a section, and then inside section, I'm going to create a new div. So we want to have two columns, right? And this div would be of grid. So let's add a class name to the section. First, make the text white for all the columns, and then inside the div, we're gonna add another class name to mark item as a div. We're gonna set it to div, and then we define how many columns we want to have. In this case, we're gonna have just like two columns. That would be grid columns 2. We're gonna also define the gap in between those columns, which would be set to 8, and items will be centered. Also add padding from the horizontally and vertically. And on the larger screens, we're going to have a bigger gap, so XL gap 16. And we're gonna also make a smaller padding for larger padding for larger screens, the other way around. So small PY16 and then XL PX16. Let's save that. And we'll add an image on the first column. So let's first import the image. This is the image that I have inside my public images folder, and I'm gonna add the image tag and as a source indicate the path of my image, which is images and then the name of the image. As I mentioned previously, we have to pass in width and height. In this case, we'll set both to 500. And then once we create the second div, it will automatically be considered as a second column of the grid. First, we'll add like a header of this div about like what this section is about, which is about us or about me. And after that, we're gonna add a paragraph, a little bit of here where I see could be a description, but I'm just gonna paste in a dummy text, which could be modified later on based on your experience. And so this is how it looks like, and then on bigger screens, it kind of goes into the center. Maybe we want it more spread out, but we're gonna fix that doing the styling. First, let's update the font sizes of the header and the padding, and then we can change the positioning because we're gonna also add like skills and experience section. And yeah, so let's start with updating the header. I'm gonna push this out so we have more space and maybe open this to the side so we can see what gets changed. And for this header, let's add a class name. We can change the text to size to 4XL. And then font, let's make it bold. Also, text would be white. And add some margin bottom, so we have space in between the paragraph and the header. As for the paragraph, we're going to change text color and set it to also a little bit darker. Text size would be base, and then on larger screens it would be LG. Okay, that looks better. Let's do on a little bit larger. This medium is smaller. Big breakpoint, and this is after the description. We're gonna have different tabs basically, and we want the tab names to show up in flex row direction, so that's why we create a wrapper container. And inside here we're going to, before we create the tab itself, I'm gonna show up just like three spans. One would be for skills, education, and then experience, but this could be modified as well. And let's do some styling for those. They show up in a row, so add some spacing, etc. And then we can add the functionality, so based on which tab is open, we get that content. Let's add first margin on the right side, then font semi-bold, and then on the hover, since it's clickable, let's do text white. And by default, the text color would be this hash that I'm passing. Okay, so now if I hover over, I do get white. So I only applied for skills for now, but then we can copy and paste it. And then border bottom would be purple. So this would be for the active element only. And in this case, once again, we're using skills. And now to be able to, I guess, switch in between these tabs, we want about us section to be turned into a client component, and we would need a state as well to hold information as to which tab is open. And for that, we would go at the top and add, using keyword use client, define this as a client component. And we also import from React use state and use transition hooks. And first we create a tab state that's going to hold information which tab is open. By default, we're going to do skills. And then we're also going to import this start transition function from use transition hook that we are going to use inside handle tab change function that takes in the ID and then starts transition, and that transition updates the UI, and it updates the state without blocking the UI. So state update would be done by set tab, and then ID is passed. Now we will create a new component to handle this like tab button, and that would be in components, new file tab button.jsx. We create another functional component, and for as a we paste the span that we had previously created. We turn that span into a button, and as for props, it needs to take active. Also select tab what happens on click, as well as the children. Children would be what's displayed inside the button, so we're going to update that skills into a dynamic value of children. And the reason we need active is because we have different styles when it's active and when it's not. And because we have different styles, let's create a variable, name it button classes. And based on the active set, it would have conditional values. So if active question mark, let's have text white, border bottom, and then purple. As for as if it's not active, then the text is going to be different color. And we also have some class names that are shared between the two, and those we're going to leave it inside the class name, and I'll show you guys how. First, let's remove all these classes. We don't need them on the button anymore. And for the button, we're just gonna pass on click select tab that's coming in as props. And inside the button, let's create a new paragraph and define classes for that one. So if I accept this, I would need to put the children inside the paragraph and then remove the classes that we already defined. So the only ones we're gonna keep is margin right 3 and then font semi-bold, because those apply in both cases, whether or not it's active or not. And let's turn this into a conditional, into an object that takes in a variable, and then using string literals we add a text. So yeah, this will combine the both. And inside, going back about section, we're gonna import tab button. And going where we have this supposed to have buttons, we're gonna add it in there, pass select tab handle tab change that we defined. And we're gonna call, but handle tab change also takes in the value, so we have to use it as a callback function and pass ID for like as a skills. And then whether or not, if it's selected tab, it means the state tab that we have. If it equals to skills, then it would be active, not selected. And inside we give the label, which is skills, and then close the tab button. Let's save that. And if we go to our application, we should see skills show up. The first one is coming from the tab button, and the other one are just like spans. And if we click, we do get an error that start transition is not a function. I think the order matters, so I'm just gonna change is pending first and save it. And let's do the same for the other education and certifications. So we just have to change all the values accordingly. And let's remove this extra span that we have after the tab buttons and save it. Now let's see if we click on them, we don't get an error anymore, and then they actually get updated. The ones that are set as an active. Now what we want to do is for the active tab, we want to display, so each single one of them will have its own content, and then this content would be displayed conditionally. And let's create a new array, name it tab data, and this will contain information for every tab, what kind of content it has. So first we will have title, skills, then ID for skills, and then content. And this doesn't have to be a string. It could be like we could pass JSX to this field. So I'm gonna do unordered list, and as for the list items, this would be for all the list of the skills. So we're just gonna add in some values in here, and we'll copy this first object in the array and modify it. We're gonna add two more objects for certification and experience, and we'll modify their values. So first comes the education, and the third is certification. The autocomplete in this case is pretty useful because it gives some values we don't have to think about. I'll just update the last one. Okay, now that we have this, we will take this tab data, and after we have buttons is where we want to show the content. So let's scroll down, and once the buttons are done, we're gonna create a new div. And what this div is going to do is it's going to take in like adding some margins at the top. You will find the one that has the ID that is same as our tab state that we have in here. And based on that state, whichever contents ID matches, so items in the array, then it would display the respective content. And if we save this, we should see the education is displayed, now the skills, and then certificates, right? So we have some space here that when we update it kind of moves up. So let's fix that like styling in terms of styling. And that would be maybe like the flex position. We're gonna do flex start, and let me move this so we can see if it actually once it's updated. So that would be for tab buttons, justify start, save it. Oh no, actually it's not the tab button styling, it's the column itself. We can turn it into a flag. So let's take the div for that column, add a class name. We can also add some margin at the top by default, and then on the larger screen it's going to have 0. We have to remember that on smaller screens we're going to have only one column. That's why we need the margin between the image at the top. And then we make it flex column, and height full is what's going to set it to like expand full height, and then push it all the way up. And let's take a quick look at the mobile view. So as I said, we have a margin here, image shows up first full width, and then about me, like the text and the tabs that we have. Okay, that's great. I'm gonna close out this mobile view now. And let's go back to our code and add like bullet points to our unordered list, which can be done by list disk. Also add some padding. That's how on Tailwind by default it has no bullets. Now let's build the project section that contains projects in the grid format, and each project card contains the title, description. We also on hover have different icons. So this would be for the preview link, this would be for the GitHub, and at the top we have text using which we can filter out the different kinds of projects. For the project section, since we're going to have images on the projects, I have added some images from my projects that I built on previous tutorials on my channel, which you can check it out. And those are inside public images folder and then projects. As for where we're going to use these images is inside project section. So let's create a new component, name it project section, and in here we will add like a header at the top, and then we'll create that says my projects, and we'll create a projects card, and those cards will be mapped out in here. So let's go ahead and create that. And the project card is going to take few props. First one is going to be the image URL, like path of the image. Then we have the title of the project itself and the description. For the image this time, we're not going to use Next.js image. We're just going to take image as like set it as a background. So inside here, let's create a separate div for the image. And then in the style, we're gonna pass background, and as a string, then URL will pass the dynamic image path. So that would be image URL. Let's save this, and then we can also add like the background size, and that is going to be cover. And okay, I'm gonna move this out. Class name, we can also add other styles, like for example, the size of the image. Otherwise, it's a div, so it's not gonna have any height. Let's set height 52, and then on larger screens, we're gonna do medium and up. That's gonna be 72. Inside, after this image div, we're gonna have another div that's going to have a class name text white, and in here we'll display just header as a title and then paragraph as a description of the project. Let's save that. Let's go back to project section. I'm gonna import project card here at the top. And the next thing that I'm gonna paste in here is array of my projects. So each array item is going to contain an ID, title, description, image, and tags. We're gonna go into tags a little bit later on. And so the images are coming from this projects images folder, and then we'll go inside the component and map those projects data out. And then inside the map, we take in the project and pass the project information to the project card that we just created. So as a key, we're going to use project.id. I have set every ID as unique. And so title is going to be project title. Then we have image description, that's project description, and finally image that's going to be image URL, that's going to be project.image. And let's add a closing tag to the project. If we go to the application, this is how our project listed looks right now. So let's go to the project card and update some of the styling, starting with adding rounded corners, but we'll add it at the top only for the image, and then at the bottom for the other section, so it looks like the card itself has rounded corners and not both elements. Then we're gonna update the background color of where we have the text, add some padding to it on X4, as well as add styling to the title, so that we would set font to Excel. Then we'll update the size weight of the font to semi-bold, and that's got updated. We'll move on to adding some margin on the bottom, so it's a little bit separated from the paragraph. And now updating the styling of paragraph, we'll change the text color, make it not white, but just a little bit darker than the header. So visual header has to have more significance. And now we will add an overlay on this image. So when somebody hovers over, they're going to be able to see the links that they can click. And we'll call this div an overlay. We'll make this parent component relative, and overlay's position would be absolute. And as we have already done this, we'll position it so it takes up the full width, full height, and from top it would be 0, left it would be 0. And as for background, we would give it like a little darker color, but we'll set the opacity to 0 by default, and it will also be hidden by default. It should only appear when somebody hovers over here. So now how can we do that? We can mark the parent, so its hover state is dependent on the parent. So we can mark it as a group, And then we can say group on the group, hover, and then change the state like color or etc. So group dash hover, and then state we'll set it to flag, so it would be hidden by default, then it would appear. And group hover, we can also change the opacity. So from 0 when it's not visible at all, we'll set it to 80%. And for transition, we can set an effect. All this change of opacity and duration could be 500 milliseconds. And if we save this, hover over, we're going to see that the background is going to appear. And in the middle of this background, we wanted to darken it because we wanted to add some links. So let's import the icons that we want for these links. The ones that I picked was code bracket icon, and another one is eye icon. So what I was thinking is we show both the GitHub URLs, and these icons are coming from hero icons, and also the preview URLs for your projects. And then let's import a link from Next.js. And this both of these icons, we're gonna place that inside our overlay as I mentioned. So let's open that up, go inside, add a link. For now, before we add links href, I'm going to set it to the default /, otherwise it's going to throw an error. Then we add an icon in there. As for the class names of the icon, heights and widths are both 10. Text, let's change this to not white, but a little bit darker color. And we also need to have like the cursor pointer, so when somebody hovers over it, they get this they know it's clickable and the cursor changes to pointer. We also want on hover it to turn into white, and let's do the same for the link as well. We'll set the heights and widths to 14, bigger because we want to add a border width would be 2, and we'll also make it relative so then we can position the icon in relation to that. And the border color by default would be the same as the icon color, although on hover we're gonna make border also white. And let's save this. So yeah, this shows up on the top right corner. Now we can make the main overlay as a flex, and then item center and justify center. That should center our link item. Okay, and it does show up in center. We can also center the icon inside the link itself. That's why we made link relative. We're gonna set icon to absolute. And then, as we did before when we centered things, top 50%, left 50%, also adding transform translate. And once we add that, that will be minus 50%, negative 50% for both x and y. And it shows up a little bit on the side. Oh, I have a typo, I'm missing s. Okay, it looks a little bit still pushed to the side. Let's remove flex from here because, oh, and then margin is margin is what's pushing it from this position. Let's save this, and okay, so now it's centered. Great, let's work on the hover. So we haven't added, oh, hover, it just says white. That's why it's not like showing up. It should be text white, but also not only on icon, but whenever the link itself is hovered, that's when we want to change the hover state of the icon. So right now, icon is only getting hovered when we're pointing at it. So the way it changes once again how we used group, but because we have group added on the overlay component itself, if we want to have another group, we have to give it a name. So I'm going to give it name link, so group / link, and then this hover would only change the state when group / link is hovered over. So let's do group dash hover and then / link, the name of the group. And now, yep, when we hover over the link, it also code bracket icon changes the color. And let's add another link, as I mentioned, for the eye icon. Only thing I'll change here is the icon, and later on we'll have the link as well. Let's add a margin on the first one on the right side. Save it so they have a space in between. Great, so yeah, we have both links and icons in here. And we would have to now actually pass in the values for the link. So I'm going to name it git URL and then preview URL in the props of the project card and pass it on to the link and to our second link. But if we pass right now, we're going to get an error because we also have to pass it wherever we have defined project card, which is in project section. So for every value, I'm going to add just the sample URL, and you can change those for your project links easily from the project section data array. Let's save this, and also to fix the error inside the project card, we have to update the URL. So let's save that, and oh yeah, project.git URL. That preview, save that. All right, great. And now if we go scroll over, those are links. And yep, so on mobile, one card shows up per each row. Let's add the margin top of the header so it has some space between the image. Actually, let's make it bigger. I'm going to set this to 3 instead. And if we expand this, we'll see that we have 3 cards per each row with their links on hover. Let's add filter tags above projects, and that will go inside projects section. So the filters will show up under my projects, and then it would, like, clicking on it would filter out what kind of projects there are. So let's create some divs, visualize it first, and then we'll create a component and the filtering functionality. So first, let's start with button all. That would include all the projects. Then I'll add web, and as a component itself that includes these buttons, we're gonna make that all the text white so they show up, and we'll make it flags, and flags direction is going to be row so they show up side by side. Let's also center it by justify center, and then item center as well, and add the gap too. And so we do have text white already. We can add some padding on Y, so let's remove the text white. And okay, that looks better. So let's move on to the button itself. This is gonna have like an outline. It's gonna be rounded full, and for the border size it would be 2, and then border purple 500 we'll have for the active selected filters. Let's add some padding so the border has space around it. We'll increase the text size to XL, and cursor pointer would be also set since it's a button. Let's change PY to 3 so it's more like, not like a circle, but more rounded. And let's copy this styling to our second button, which is web, and let's instead update the styling so how we would style just the one that's not active. And we would just change the border color. We're gonna set that same as the text. So let's do slate 600. And on hover, we can also set that to white. Hover border white. And that is how it's looking like. Now let's move on to creating this buttons into a separate components, and then we'll add a function and a state that's gonna determine which buttons are active. So let's create project tag inside components, new file, new component. Then I'm gonna open this to the side and copy the styling for the button, and then afterwards make it dynamic. So let's paste that in here, and let's determine what props we want to take in. So we would need the name of the filter, then on click function, as well as the if the filter is selected currently. And then based on if it's selected or not, the styling's gonna vary. So let's create a variable button style that's gonna conditionally displays. If it's selected, we would have this like text white and border would be purple 500. Then for the other condition, when it's not active, we can just copy what we had for the web previously inside project section. Yep, a little darker text and then the border slate 600. Okay, I'm also going to copy this hover state and let's move this out. And I'm gonna remove all in here. I'll leave only the default states that are going to be. And let's turn this into a template literal that will also accept the dynamic value of button styles variable. All right, now we need to update this hard-coded value of all into a name instead that comes in as a prop. And the next thing would be on click itself on the button. We're gonna pass on click the prop to its on click variable. Let's save that. Okay, that should be it for this project tag. We can move back to the project section and import project tag at the top. And once that's imported, we're going to turn project section into a client component because we need to save the state and do some filtering. So that would require that. Also use state from React, and we'll create a new state that will track which filter is selected. And by default, it is going to have a all as a selection. So let's do tag set tag that equals to use state all. And this is where the tag field that objects inside this project array have comes in. So tag field is an array and it contains all the tags that certain project is marked as. It could take one or more values since it's an array. And now let's create a function that when a tag is selected is going to filter out the projects. And I'm going to name this handle tag change. Actually, this one will just update the tag. So it's going to take in the value for new tag and you will set it new tag, set the current tag to that new tag. And we will need to take this handle tag change function and pass it to our project tag component. So let's first display the project tag and then do on click handle tag change. And we'll do create separate project tags for every text we have, like all, mobile, and etc. And let's pass that on. So tag name would be all, and then active would be, instead of active, we have is selected field, and that would equal to condition if tag the state is equal to all, then you'll be true. If not, false. Since handle tag change is a function that takes in the value, we have to update on click on the right side on project.jsx, and we have to pass in the name of the tag itself. So it takes in an argument, right? And project tag knows which name we're selecting. That's why. Let's duplicate this and do the same for web, mobile, or any other tags that we want to have. The function that we pass remains the same, just the name and the is selected value, we do update those. All right, mobile. Let's save this. Let's see if we click, oh, the background is, let's change to border instead. And I don't see the name. It might be that the field, oh, the prop name is name itself. So instead of in project section, we had tag. So we can change that to name. And let's save that. Now the name should be showing up. Great. And if we click on it, it will select that value that's clicked. Now when we click, we do want this project to get updated and filtered out, right? So let's write the function for that, and we can just write it inside the component. Previously, we would have to create like a use effect or create a separate state for like this kind of updates, but in like the newer versions, we can just directly filter it. Is it recommended to directly filter it inside the component? So project data that filter, we take in the project, and if project tag includes the current tag as a state, then it would pass the filter, and we take filter projects and map it out instead of just projects data. And let's fix the parentheses, save it. So now if I click to web, it should only show me web projects. And then if I click to mobile, only mobile. That's great. In this part of the video, we're going to implement this contact us section that contains some information as to like why they should contact you, or social icons, and then on the right side, we're going to have a form that's going to send an email once user clicks the send message, and we'll also add this footer at the end of our application. For a contact form, we are going to use Resend to send emails and install the module that's called Resend as well. It's very easy to set it up. We have to create an API key. If you don't have an account, you can create an account. You have to go to resend.com. I'm going to include the link. And once you're there, click add an API key. It's going to generate. And once you generate that, copy it, create a new file, env.local in your project. And going back to the documentation, let's see what we should name to our environment variable. So I see that they're using resend API key. Make sure the name matches, and we can press equal and exactly paste your API key, which like belongs to you since you'll be sending the emails from your application. Now we can go to their documentation, switch to the app router version, and inside app, as they mention in here, I'm going to create an API folder, and then inside API folder, we have a send. And to create the API route, we named the file route.js. And I am going to paste the code that they have here, and let's go over it. So first, I'm gonna comment out email template because we don't have that. And so we use the API key that we just added in our environment variables, and then we can change the settings from who is the email sent from. And in here, you're gonna add the email where you'll be sending the email, and then inside the to field, there's an array, so you can send that to yourself, something like if you have support email, for example, support.com, and also the person who showed the interest, you can just send as a confirmation, like, oh, you showed the interest here, etc. I'm just gonna put my emails in both of these cases. And then for the email template, if we take a look at the example that they have on GitHub, I'm gonna go to app API, actually inside component, email template.tsx. It's just a React component, so it's easy to create templates just using a React. But for now, we don't need the complicated templates. I'm gonna comment this out. And instead of this wrapper here, I'm just gonna in place create a component and add like a body, something that says, for example, we can have a paragraph tag and then email body. Let's save that. And if we go back to the documentation, we have one more step is verify the domain. If you go to domains tab from your admin folder, you can say add a domain where you add a domain that you own, because you can't really send an emails from, I guess, Gmail. You have to like own the domain, and then Gmail or other services. And once you add that, you'll get this DNS records that you'd have to go back and add in your domain provider. Now let's create the form itself. This would go in components in a new file, email section component, and then we'll create a functional. Oh, I put the ending run. Let's rename, it should be JSX. And inside here, we create a functional component, name it email section. And I'm going to change, instead of div, we're gonna have section first. Inside this section, let's add a class name. This would be a grid, and on larger screens, we're gonna have two columns. On the left, it would be more like an information. We'll add some margins horizontally and responsiveness, also some padding on the top and the bottom, and the gap 4 so that the columns have a gap in between. I'm gonna remove this default text, and let's update the ending tag to section as well. Inside here, we can start working on our first column, which, as I mentioned, is going to be more like informational. Let's add a header. I'm using H5 in this case, and something that says, let's connect. Let's update the styling of this H5. For text, we're going to set to Excel. Font is going to be bold. As for the text color, we'll have white, and add some margin so that it has space between a paragraph that would follow up. This paragraph is going to be more like a description of what this form is for and who should reach out. So for text color, I'm gonna set a little bit darker than the white, and I will also like paste a text that I have written up. Let's add first, before we add the text, margin bottom, and then let's add max width. We don't want it to span all the way to the width of the grid, so that would be max width medium. And below this description, I want to have social links. So we'll create another div. Let's just name that socials and make it flags. And flags direction would be rows, so they line it up one next to each other. And for the gap, we're gonna set that to 2. Now, I do have pasted inside public these two SVGs for icons, and the link of where I got them from I'm gonna also include in the description. So if you want, I'm using GitHub icon and LinkedIn icon and importing at the top of the email section. But if you want to use like different icons, you can also look them up in the same style. So yeah, let's import it, and the path is public. Then we have the name GitHub, public/GitHub icon SVG. And instead of Twitter, this should be LinkedIn. So I'm gonna change the name in here. For the file name. Okay, let me close the file browser for us, and also this would be link, so might as well import the link from next link. And we'll also add the image, because to use SVG we can display that using image from NextJs. Now let's start creating our link. So first we're gonna have a link, and then inside the link we'll add the image. And let's start link href. This is where you can add the link to your profile. I'm just gonna have GitHub default, and then image. This is how we add SVGs in NextJS as a path. We import the SVG, we give it a name, and then inside the source we indicate that name, and also add like alt tag for the image, and do the same for LinkedIn. Now that we have this first column, we can start create a second div that would be for the second column, and inside this div we'll create a form. The direction would be flex for this form, and direction is column with gap as 4. And let's start creating first input. Before we do the input, we have to add a label at the top, and to mark which input this label belongs to, we use HTML4 props for the label. And if we say an email, then on the input we would also give that name as an email. Then we indicate type, which is email. For actually the type we add that on the input itself. And the label, I'm going to change it to your email. All right, let's crop that out, edit on the input, and we add an ID that is email as well as the name and required field. So if somebody types it in and has no value, it's going to show there. Now let's take a look at our email section component and import it on the page.js so that it shows up in our application. And I'm going to import the component at the top and afterwards place it after the project section. So let's add that in here, save it, and we're gonna scroll down and we can see the text we have added on the left and the icons as well as the form with one input element. Now we can add the other inputs to our form and style it a little bit. So going back to the email section, where I'm going to add more styling on the label. So we can do block first and then add some margin at the bottom as well as the text size, which would be small. Font type would be medium. And move on to the input. We add a class name and then we change the background color first. We're gonna make it a little lighter than the background of the application itself. We add a border and the border color is even gonna be lighter shade than the background, so we are able to visually see that it's an input. And we can also change the placeholder color, which is also going to be shade, and then the text color is going to be more vibrant as user starts typing. We set something to gray 100. For the size of the text, same as label, it's going to be small, and then we're going to have a rounded corners and add a padding to the input as well as the width would be full width. So let's save this, and the background color hasn't updated, so let's see if there is a typo. Oh, I'm missing one element. Okay, that looks good. Now we can move on and add some of the other inputs that we need for the contact form. So for that, I'm going to copy this label and input that we have, paste it, and modify like the ID and then the label names of the input. So the second one is going to be subject of the email that we'll use later on in the API. So changing that as well as the type will be text instead and ID so that it matches the label. As for the placeholder, we can change that to be something like just saying hi or completely remove that. And if we save this and look at the screen on the right, we'll see that subject input has been added to the form. We can fix the gap between the input elements. I'm gonna set that to 6 and save it. It does look that it's adding gaps in between all of the label and input. So let's add margin at the bottom of the label. Actually, I'm gonna remove that and instead we'll wrap label and input into a div and then add margin to the div, if that makes sense. So yeah, let's try that. Let's remove the gap. Now we have more margins, but we can do this and cut this, place it after the input. And we can do the same for our second input. We can wrap that inside a another div that has class margin B6. Save that. And add that class also on our first div. Okay, so we have margins and we can add like a smaller margin, for example, 2 to the label. I'm gonna copy that and do the same on the other label for the subject. Okay, now if you save that, that looks better, and we can move on to adding a third field, but this won't be input, this would be text area, so that's why I'm not gonna paste that in. I'm just gonna add a div with the margin 6, same as for the other inputs, and start creating the text area. So we still need the label HTML form. This would be the message, class name. Let's accept the suggestion, see if it looks good. It would say message, and then text area name. We have to also match the name to the HTML4. ID would be same. Columns, we don't need to define columns. It's gonna be a pretty small one. Save this. The styling would be same as we have for the other elements. Let's see if it matches. It looks like it did suggest the same one. And placeholder, leave your message here, or let's talk about, and then 3 dots is what I'm gonna add. And after we close out the text area, let's add a button for the submit of this form. So after we have this div, would come a button. The type of it would be submit, and we write the submit function afterwards. As for the styling, we're gonna add a class name. So the background color would be purple. Let's add the P500 on the hover. It's gonna be slightly different purple, like shade of purple 600. Text would be white. Font size medium. We'll have some paddings on all the sides and the rounded corners with the width full of the form. And then as a label, we'll have send a message. Let's save that, and that looks good. So now let's see how it looks like on the full width, and we can add the mesh on like the wherever it says let's connect, just to make it more animated and look nicer, since we don't really have an image for the contact form. So for the mesh, it's actually, we don't need any SVGs or create it in Figma. We can just use like Tailwind classes to do that. It's that simple. And after this section, I'm gonna create a div just for the mesh. And as for the class name, the classes that will create the div is going to be this like background where we pass a custom value to the background. That's why we have brackets. Then we're gonna pass radial gradient, and we're gonna set 2 stops. So the middle would be the purple, and then it would expand to transparent. So it's gonna create a circle effect. And rounded full is also what's gonna shape it as a circle. We need to pass height and width, otherwise it would not show up. By default, it has no height. And for the Z index, I'm gonna set it to 0, so it kind of shows up on the background. So that's our circle. It kind of blurs, doesn't blur out, so it has like a strict border. So let's add the blur effect. I'm gonna set the intensity to large and save it. So yeah, this is what we're looking for. It's just we're gonna position this, move it to the side. So we're gonna make the section relative, and the mesh would be absolute. And we'll move this absolute on the left side, probably at the top or at the corner. So we can add first from the top, it would be positioned full. So at the bottom, on the left, we're gonna have -4 value, and then we said transform translate to -50% and -50 for x and y axis. So it goes up to the bottom. We can push it out the value a little bit or all the way at the top by setting it to 0. Also, let's add a class name to the other components z10 higher than the one we have, so they are in front first. And let's move it to the bottom. Actually, it does look better, and we're gonna add a footer, so the white space would be replaced by the footer afterwards, or if not, we can also push this mesh out. If we didn't have footer, that would be the solution. And let's move on to creating footer now. We are going to add a new component. We'll name it footer.jsx, and once we create a functional component, inside we can use HTML tag that is footer instead of div. So I'm gonna update here that on line 5, and let's remove this placeholder text. Let's add a div, and inside div on the left side first we're gonna have a logo, so I'm gonna add a span with the text of logo. It could be replaced with your image, and then on the right side we'll have a paragraph that says all rights reserved. This won't be a line yet until we do the styling, but first let's go to the page, add that the footer, and all the way after the container it's gonna be like the last element, and then we can have it open to the side and see the changes. So footer does show up. We don't see the text yet because the color of the text is black, I believe, so it gets covered by the mesh. So yeah, if we hover over, that's the logo. And let's style the footer now. So starting off with the footer element itself, we're gonna add the class name footer as well as the border. The border color would be the same as the border we have on our input elements and also on our header, and it would only be on the top side. Then for the inner element, we're gonna add a container so it has some space around, also a little bit more padding, and we have to fix so the border space still shows up on the sides. So to not have any space around, we can say set border left as transparent and border right as transparent as well. So that removes that white space. And for the text, we're gonna set that to color white. So yeah, now the text shows up, and let's continue with the styling of inner container. We're gonna set that to flex and justify content in between, so we have them spread out on the left and on the right side, so we only have 2 elements. For the smaller text on the paragraph, we're gonna make it more gray color, so slate 700. And I think the border at the top hasn't really changed the color, so it should be not white, but like this color that I have passed. Oh, because we don't have to spell out top, we can pass T. Okay, now that looks good. And let's make this a little bit lighter. I think it looks too dark. No, the other way around. So it was 600. And everything else looks good. Let's update our send API route so the from email and your personal email also comes in as the environment variable, so that in the source code it's not exposed on the client side since it's your information, and that we're going to take that variable and pass it in the form field, and make sure to add from email in your env local file. Replace it with the email that's going to be sending emails. Then we can try it out using Postman, make an API request to localhost, API send. We should be getting back an ID if email is sent back successfully, and also double checking it on my mail. I received this like dummy email that has hello world as a subject. Because we hard coded these values, it sent it, but now we can modify it by making it taking request and result. And we can read the body of the request, and we're gonna make the body have three fields. It's going to be first one email, then we also have a subject and a message. And once we have access to these three fields, we can modify the to also send an email, and then I'll modify the body of the email so it contains a message that user filled out on the form. Let's save that and add subject as a header. We can also add something like thank you for submitting and confirmation. Any way you'd build a React component, you can do the same in this case, and or like message for ourselves. Maybe you have like multiple contact us forms on different websites and you want to know which one they've submitted. So some kind of like identifier, you can add that on the next line. I'm just gonna say new message submitted, and let's go back to email section. Now we need to connect the part where user submits the form and the API request is sent, and we'll do that by creating a function handle submit. It's an asynchronous function since it is making a request. It takes in an event, and we're going to do event prevent default so that the page doesn't get reloaded when the form is submitted. Then next we'll take in the data coming in from the forms through the event. So email would be e.target email value, subject similarly, and the message. And next we will create a JSON data format out of this data. So it would be JSON that stringify data. That way we can't really send JSON, we have to send the string format of it. And we define the endpoint, which is API/send for the route that we created. And finally, we send in the request and get back the data. So these are the options that I'm going to pass in on request. The method is post. We also have headers application JSON, and as a body, we pass in the JSON data variable that we created, and in the end, we get back the result and we call fetch function that's going to make an API request and give us back the response, and we can convert the response in a JSON format. Then we have to read the response, parse it. So if the status, if it's successful, we can for now just test it out, console log that the message has been sent, and let's close this function out. So yeah, we did define the function, but now we have to pass it to the form so that on submit it actually triggers it. And the way we do that is make sure the button is of type submit, and on the form we define on submit and we pass in this function. Since we have now button and on-click events, we have to make this component client component, and we add use client keyword at the top of the file. Otherwise, we won't be able to use button. And we also change in the route, we have to get body using await request.json. I didn't realize that changed in Next.js. And once we update the route.js, one final thing that I like to do usually is to check that the names from the data match the names on the input elements as well. Otherwise, we won't be able to get the data from the event. So we take a look at the input, and for example, this one is missing. So I'm going to add name equals email. Same thing should go for the subject and the message itself. So this one doesn't have it either. Let me add that. And what about the message? Message does have name. Great. And for the status, we have to get it from the response, and it actually doesn't send the status. We can modify that, but it sends numbers. So usually 200 is number for successful status, and then let's log out. Let's console log the data that comes in, which as we saw in Postman should be ID. So if I send message, it's gonna bring back ID, and console log message sent, the message that we added. Okay, that's great, but what we actually want to do is the user to know that this been updated. So we're gonna add a state to track that using useState hook from React, and let's create a new state. This could be constant email submitted, like a Boolean value, and then set email submitted. By default, it's going to be a false. And then we can take that hook that updates the state, a function that updates the state, and once it's been submitted, we can set it to true inside our handle submit function. Now on the UI side, we add the conditional where if email submitted, show a text in green color that email was sent successfully. Now let's test it out. So if I press in here, send a message, and then once it's sent, the text shows up. We are done with the email section, and now we will add achievement section. This will go below the hero. And this is once again optional, but it's a good practice to show achievements in a way of numbers and metrics to recruiters or other your potential clients. So I've pasted my list of achievements, and it has two objects have two variables, metric and a value. Value is a number, metric is like what measures it. And inside the functional component for achievement section, we're gonna take in the list and we're gonna map them out and display it as a like a same format. And for now, before we do the styling, let's just display a header as a value, and then smaller like a paragraph would be the metric, and then we can start adding class names. We want these metrics to display in the column direction and justify center so they're spread out and some margin to it. Afterwards, for the header, we have text white, for Excel, and bold. As for the paragraph, the text would be of lighter, darker color than white, and the size would be base. Alright, for the outside wrapper itself, we're gonna add some padding as other sections have. On larger screen, it's gonna have a bigger gap as well as smaller paddings for smaller screens. And we're gonna add another div that's gonna have a border because we don't want the div with the border to span full width. That's why we're adding another one, and we'll make it have rounded corners as well as also having a padding and flex direction to be the row. So let's crop this out and wrap the list inside this div. And so that it shows up right now, we go back to the page and import an achievement section in here and display it following the hero section as I mentioned. All right, let's save this. Go back to our application and we can see the metrics show up in here. Now let's make some changes to the hero section, give it like a little bit more padding so we don't see the side of about me. And we can also make changes to the header. So we're gonna make achievement section padding set to 4. And then moving on to the hero section, let's add a class name to section. We're gonna set this class name for larger screens. Padding would be higher, so padding Y16 should be fine. And then let's also change the text color for our text on the left to be 8XL, which is a little bit bigger. As you can see, it's when the text becomes bigger, it's moving on to the next line and the width height is increasing. So let's fix that by setting it like on updating the leading first. Leading is like height in between the lines, and after the leading we're gonna update the direction. We're gonna set justify to self start, so that way it's aligned on the start. And let's give it more space as well. So call span, I'm gonna set it as 8. And for the image, which is second column, it's gonna be 4. Now going to the navbar, let's set a border and give it a little bit more aligned with the other elements, as well as add a padding. So in here we can make the div container also more padding on larger screens. And center the container, margin X auto, add a border as I mentioned. The border would be the same color as we have border for the achievement section. And let's see how it looks like. So that does look better. And let's update the footer. So this one, the logo has is over the mesh, so it should have a higher index. And we can do that by going to the footer file and adding Z10 here. Save the changes. And yep, that looks better. In order to be able to easily customize colors and our theme in our project, we can define the main colors that we're using inside Tailwind configuration file. So first I'm going to import the colors they already have defined, and then inside the theme we're gonna add color section, and we'll add two colors of primary and secondary. I'm gonna set primary to purple and for secondary pink, but you can also pick other colors from the Tailwind set. So if we save this right now and missing closing bracket, so if we save this, the reason for that is that we have only defined two colors, primary, secondary, but we don't have to redefine all the colors. We can just destructure and add the colors that already exist, and on top of that define these two or as many as you want. So we got colors back. Now in order to be able to, with just like one line of code, change the primary and secondary colors, we have to, everywhere that we have defined this, change it. So I'm gonna go to hero section first, and where we have, instead of purple, this is going to be primary, and then instead of pink, this is going to be secondary. As well as for hire me, download CV, I do have already changed from what I can see. And after that, let's navigate to project tag. Here as well, it should be set to primary. Next up, we have email section where we have this mesh that is using purple color. So go ahead, change that to primary. And also one thing you can do, you can like search wherever we're using purple from the search bar inside VS Code, but I'm gonna walk through everywhere right now. So make sure not to miss it. And after email section, we have navbar, which actually that's it. And now let's see how easily it is to customize them. So for example, if I go back to the Tailwind configuration file, and if I change this to, for example, green, I'm going to get this, and I can change this to yellow. So the main color would be green, secondary would be yellow. What we can do is that we don't need to use necessarily two colors. You can just use one color. So I'm gonna set this to yellow, so both of them could be the same. And that's how easy it is to change. I think the only place we missed it is in here, and this is inside tab button. So purple, yep, let's change it to primary, save it, and that's it. And before we move on to the last part, deployment, we're going to do animations, and I'm gonna reload the page to show you guys animations. So it would be on the hero section as well as on the metrics section. Then we have where the projects get displayed one by one. And we have it on education and sort of like tabs itself where this gets expanded. And let's get right into it. For implementing animations, we will be using these two packages. First one is Framer Motion, and then we have React Animated Numbers. And we'll install both of them using npm install and then the names of the packages. And even though animations can be done using CSS, the reason we're using these packages is that they make it very easy to create animations. It's way faster that way and also easier to read, especially if you're new to animation world. And first, we're gonna get started with React Animated Numbers, and what it will do is when you go to the website, it's gonna increment these numbers here in the achievement section. So let's navigate to the achievement section, and in here, the module itself is using useRef, and for that we have to define our component as a use client, and there's some issues with importing the module, so the hack that we have to do is import dynamic from NextJs dynamic and then create a dynamic version of the component. So I'm gonna display now how, so it would be animated numbers, and this equals to dynamic import of the animated numbers, React Animated Numbers, which is the name of the module, and we start with return. And let's wrap this in here, and server-side rendering false. That's what it had issue with, basically server-side rendering. And I'm gonna copy this, put it inside the achievement section. But before I do that, I'm gonna modify the values because this package takes in the number. And right now I have kind of like string mixed with numbers. But what we can do is instead to use still like plus and etc. We can add a new field, call it post fix, and add that plus that way. And I'm gonna remove it from here. Same goes for user. Maybe we want to do on this case just more realistic number, and let's do prefix. That would be here. Hours, this could be an exact number. For the years, we can do value 5. And 17 is not a value in Tailwind. Let me change it to 16. And I'm gonna remove achievement value, instead put our package. So for props, I'm gonna add include comma, then we have animate to number achievement value, but because we have value as a string, we would have to convert it into an integer, and we can do that using parseInt. So local, I'll set that to enus. Class name, we can also update the styling by passing class name, which is great. So text white, for Excel font bold, and then we have configs. So basically how to configurations that determine how the animations work. And in here we return mass 1, then friction 100. And if you want to customize it further, you can always go to their npm documentation, and they do have way more props than I am using here. So index plus 1, and then we all right, save this, and we can add the prefix and postfix before and after. So achievement prefix, And if we reload the page, we're gonna see that this numbers increment. I'm just gonna check. So, oh, I haven't changed. So this should be post fix, and they should be displayed in a row. So I'm gonna add flex row. For the animations on rest of the sections, we're going to use framer motion. It enables us to determine how we want animation and determine properties. So it's less like animated numbers, more like we have to build the animations ourselves, but still very easy to use. So let's start with the animations on hero section. And to turn any div section button or any component into an animation, there's two steps involved. First, we have to import motion if it's not already in that component or in that file from framer motion. And then second, we take in the component tag that we want to turn into an animation, and we add motion in front of it. So for example, if I want to add animations on this div, I'm gonna do motion.div. And right now we won't see any animations because we don't have anything defined, but there's states as to how we can define animations. So one of them is initial, and inside the initial we create like an object that defines all the CSS properties we want that div to have initially. So if, for example, if we take property and set it to 0, which means that the div is not visible, right? Then we can use a second state, which is animate. On animate, we can set opacity 1. That way we get the effect of it appearing. And it's important to note when does the initial kick in. Initial goes in whenever component gets loaded initially. And then comes in animate. And one more thing that we can define about this is transition. So which this one is optional. Transition is it has properties as well. And in this case, I'm gonna pick duration, and I wanna set it to 0.5. So how long would this change from initial to animate going to take? And let's see an example. So it would be this div that we picked, and if I reload, it would slowly appear, as you can see. And we can define as many properties as we want. For example, if we wanted to have a effect of like increasing in size and initially starting from small, we can use property scale, set it to half, and then once it gets like fully loaded, we can set it to 1. Let's save this, reload it one more time, and now it's gonna like pop up. And we can copy this animation and use it on the other column that we have in here. So if I close this out, this is the other div, right? And let's do this, remove that one. And since we changed this into motion div, we have to change also the ending tag, but this one. Okay, yep. And now, as you saw, the image also appeared. So that's great. But if we, for example, add animations on the components that are further down the page and they're not visually visible when the page loads, unless user scrolls to them, the animations still kick in when they load, right? So about me, if I add an appear effect, when I reload the page or initially loaded, the effect will kick in, but I will never get to see it. So in order to make sure that components animations kick in when they're actually visually visible to the user, we should use this hook called use in view. So let's apply it, for example, on project section. To use in view is basically a hook from PayMotion that returns the boolean of whether or not this component is in the view, and then if it is in the view or if it comes in the view, we can add an animation based on that. So first we'll need use ref because we're gonna pass the ref to the using view, and then we need the motion and the hook that I mentioned itself. Use in view from framer motion. And after this, inside the project section component itself, I am going to create a new ref that equals to use ref, and by default this would be null. Next, let's create, oops, not here, a constant is in view that equals to using view. We're going to pass the reference to it once true. So once it comes into view, set it to true. Let's save it, and reference, we're going to pass it to which part of JSX we want to control and determine if it's in view. We want this one, so I'm going to add a section here since we already don't have it. We can't really apply ref to the fragment, and I'll say ref equals to ref. So now when it comes to view, this value gets set to true. And what we want to animate is the project. So when it comes to view, projects will load one by one. And that happens inside project card. So we have map here, right? We're gonna add a motion dot lead, and let's actually change this one to unordered list. And add some animations. For this one, since we have different states, we can define the state separately, and this concept is called variance. So card variance, first state, I'm going to do initial. And initially, I'll also do a slide in effect. So that way I'll pick the property y. And then I'll set it to 50, and opacity would be 0 because it's not visible. And on animate, I'm gonna take it, move it to its position where it's supposed to be, and then opacity 1. Close out the card variant. And we're taking card variant, pass it to this one using variance prop. Then we define on which state, which property we're using from the variance. So I'm going to make it simple, and I named it initial and animate that way. So on initial, it will be set initial, but on animate, depending on if it is in view, then we'll pass animate. If it's not in the view, then let's do initial again. Save it. So now if we reload the page, once it becomes in view, it's supposed to appear, and let's see. now it did the animation. Do one more time. Okay. Now, since this is a list, what I want is the projects to appear one by one. And how can I achieve that? That would be using a transition, controlling to transition. So we take in each project and it has a unique index, right? And we also pass key equals to index, just mark it as unique. Okay, I think we want to do ref on this one because this might be visible, but not this one. So we don't want it to kick in yet. So if I try this again, so now it shows up. And back to the transition, we're going to utilize this index right here to determine the transition. And each project would be delayed by whatever the index is, times certain amount. So for example, each transition would be of duration 0.3 and each would be delayed by taking in the index and multiplying by the number depending on what gap we want to have in between those transitions. So if I reload this now, they show up one by one. Great, let's add like a minimal animation on the tab button as well. So it's going to be a simple one. I'm going to import the motion, then I am going to define variance. So by default, width would be 0. And then on active, we're going to set width to calculate, and then, oops, 100% minus 0.75 rem. And let's do motion div. So when it becomes active, we can also make animate depend on the state. So this tab button gets a state from parent as a prop, active, and if it is active, then do the animation, and if not, do default. So variance is variance, and then class name would be height 1, background primary 500, margin top 2, and margin right 3. And we'll remove this border below because this will take in the place of the border. We can't really animate the border, but we can animate a div that has a height and just has a color. Let's save that. Let's go to about me. So now it starts from 0 and the width kind of extends, and that's why we did margin right 3 as well on this one. Otherwise we didn't want it to go full width, so it would fill in like width up until like here. We'll move on to the final piece, which is deployment, and so that you can host your portfolio and start sharing. For the deployment, we are using Vercel, and please take a note that Vercel you're only able to deploy if you have your code as a Git repository. So you'd have to upload it on GitHub. It doesn't have to be public, you can do that as a private as well. And I'm gonna navigate to universal right now. Also, if you don't have account, creating an account and deploying is free. So I do have an account and I'm gonna navigate to the dashboard where there's add new button. I'm gonna select project and import. I have it connected to Git and it will already import your repositories. You can select your project and then import. For environment variables, we would need to set two environment variables that we have in .env file, otherwise the email part would not work. But if you don't have the email piece using resend, you can skip this part. So you add the name of the variable on the left side and then the value itself for your API keys as well as for your emails on the right side. And after we click deploy, it's going to start deployment. It takes usually a very short time and we'll get the link at the end of the deployment. Now the status is ready. I can click visit and it'll take me to the URL of the deployment. Thank you for watching this tutorial and I look forward to seeing your versions of the portfolio website. So make sure to put the links in the comment or jump on our Discord server and share it with others.